Amber Ridge wasn't the kind of town you'd read about in history books or see in travel guides. It was the definition of ordinary, a speck of a place nestled in a valley, surrounded by an endless stretch of thick forest. The kind of town where everyone knew each other and nothing remarkable ever happened. Or so people like to think. Beneath its quaint facade lay a history of whispered warnings and stories meant to scare children. Every kid in Amber Ridge grew up hearing the same thing. Don't go into the woods at night. The forest doesn't just hide animals, it takes people. Most dismissed the warnings as tales meant to keep kids safe from bears or coyotes. But the older residents knew better. They remembered the disappearances, the strange happenings that no one could explain. And they remembered the name that was never spoken above a whisper, Eleanor Ravenwood. It was late September when the first person disappeared. Emma Jacobs, a 17-year-old senior at Amber Ridge High, was walking her golden retriever, Daisy, as she often did. Emma loved the woods. She found peace in their silence, a break from the noise of high school drama and her overbearing parents. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she set out on her usual route along the forest trail behind her house. Daisy trotted happily beside her, sniffing the air and wagging her tail. The cool autumn breeze rustled the trees, scattering leaves along the path. "Come on, girl," Emma said, tugging gently on the leash. "Just one more loop and we'll head back." But Daisy stopped suddenly. Her ears perked up and her body stiffened. She growled low, her eyes fixed on something ahead. "What is it?" Emma asked, peering into the growing darkness. She saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then she heard it, a faint humming sound, soft and melodic, coming from deeper in the woods. It wasn't a sound she recognized, not a bird or an animal. It was almost human. "Hello," she called out, her voice uncertain. The humming stopped. Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. Daisy barked once, sharply, and then bolted, the leash slipping from Emma's grasp. "Daisy, come back," Emma yelled, running after her dog. But the woods were thick, and the growing darkness made it hard to see. She stumbled over roots and ducked under low-hanging branches, calling Daisy's name. The last thing she remembered was the humming starting again, louder this time, surrounding her like a chorus, and then silence. When Daisy returned to the Jacobs' house an hour later, she was covered in dirt and shaking. Emma didn't come home. The town rallied quickly. A search party combed the woods for days, volunteers and police alike calling Emma's name. But there was no sign of her. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her parents were inconsolable. Her mother sat by the window for weeks, staring out at the forest, waiting for Emma to come walking down the road. But she never did. 2 weeks later, 7-year-old Noah Patel disappeared. He had been playing in his backyard while his mother prepared dinner. She stepped inside for just a moment to grab his jacket, and when she came back out, he was gone. At first, she thought he might have wandered into the woods behind their house. She called his name, her voice growing more frantic with each passing second. "Noah, this isn't funny, sweetie. Come back inside." But there was no answer. The only trace of him was his toy truck, lying on its side near the edge of the trees. This time, the search party was larger. People were on edge after Emma's disappearance, and Noah's sudden vanishing only deepened their fear. Parents kept their children close, locking doors and windows at night. The woods that had once been a playground for the town's youth became a place of dread. Despite the town's best efforts, Noah was never found. As the weeks passed, more people went missing. Clara Hartwell, a retired schoolteacher, was last seen walking her dog near the woods. Greg Walters, a hunter, disappeared during a routine trip into the forest. His dog returned, but Greg didn't. A delivery driver's truck was found abandoned on a back road, the engine still running. But the driver was nowhere to be seen. The disappearances were random. Men, women, children, the elderly. No one was safe. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed a serial killer was stalking the town. Others thought it was a wild animal, though no one could explain why there were never any signs of struggle. But among the older residents, a different theory began to take hold. They spoke in hushed tones about Eleanor Ravenwood, the Witch of Amber Ridge. The story of Eleanor Ravenwood was one every child in Amber Ridge grew up hearing, though most dismissed it as folklore. According to legend, Eleanor had been a healer in the early days of the settlement over a century ago. She lived alone in the woods, growing herbs and crafting remedies for the sick. But when a deadly illness swept through the settlement, the townsfolk turned on her. Convinced she had cursed them, they dragged her from her home, tied her to a tree in the heart of the forest, and burned her alive. With her dying breath, Eleanor cursed them. "You will suffer as I have suffered. Your children, your bloodline. I will take them one by one. And when none of you remain, the forest will belong to me." Over the years, strange things happened in Amber Ridge. Children vanished. Hunters disappeared. Those who ventured too close to the cursed tree claimed to hear whispers, a woman's voice calling their name. The settlers eventually abandoned the area, leaving their stories behind. As fear gripped the town in 1997, the legend of Eleanor Ravenwood resurfaced. People began to avoid the woods entirely, and those who had homes bordering the forest moved away. But the disappearances didn't stop. Hannah Klein, a 22-year-old college student, had never heard of Amber Ridge. She was driving home for fall break when her GPS routed her through the back roads. It was late at night, and the road was deserted. The tall trees lining the road seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Hannah didn't notice the first signs of trouble, the faint static on the radio, the flicker of her headlights. But when her car sputtered and died, she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. "Not now," she muttered, turning the key in the ignition. But the engine wouldn't start. Grabbing her phone, she stepped out of the car, hoping to find a signal. The air was cold, and the silence was unnerving. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just stillness. And then she heard it, the faint hum of a melody drifting through the trees. Hannah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was soft, almost hypnotic, and it seemed to come from deeper in the woods. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer, but the humming grew louder. Her flashlight caught movement in the trees, a figure in a tattered black dress, her face pale and sunken. The woman's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and her feet didn't touch the ground. Hannah backed away, her heart pounding. She turned and ran back to her car, locking the doors behind her. But when she looked up, the woman was standing in front of the windshield, her glowing eyes boring into Hannah's. The humming grew deafening, and Hannah felt her vision blur. Darkness swallowed her. Hannah woke up at dawn, slumped in the driver's seat. Her car was in a ditch, but she was unharmed. She drove straight to the nearest police station and told them everything. The officers dismissed her story as a hallucination, but an elderly local overheard her and pulled her aside. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked, his voice grave. Hannah nodded, her hands trembling. "She's still out there," he said. "She doesn't just haunt the woods, she owns them. And once she's seen you, she'll never let you go." Amber Ridge is nearly abandoned now. The forest has reclaimed much of the land, and those who remain refuse to speak of Eleanor Ravenwood. The woods are silent, as if holding their breath. But on quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint hum of a woman's voice calling your name. And if you're brave or foolish enough to follow it, you might find yourself face to face with the Witch of Amber Ridge. But be warned, once she sees you, she'll never let you go.